The sun blazed high over the rugged wilderness, casting harsh shadows across the rocks and sparse vegetation as the woman trudged forward, her body trembling with exhaustion and her stomach twisting with hunger and thirst. She had been betrayed by those she had trusted most people she had considered friends and companions, and now she was alone, abandoned to a fate that seemed certain. The landscape around her was unforgiving. Jagged rocks jutted out of the ground, and the wind carried with it a biting dryness that seemed to sap the very life from her bones. She pressed on because stopping meant surrender, and surrender meant death. Her thoughts raced as she tried to understand how she had come to this point, how the people she had relied upon could turn their backs so easily, leaving her to face the dangers of the wilderness, unprotected and vulnerable. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat. Every sound of wind through the rocks made her heart pound faster. She stumbled over loose stones, her legs aching and her arms trembling from carrying the small pack she had managed to save from her betrayal. Inside it were scraps of food, a flask of water that had long since run empty, and a few items of clothing that offered little protection against the elements. She tried to ration her strength, forcing herself to walk with deliberate care, each step a negotiation between pain and necessity. The sun burned her skin and the wind bit at her face, and despite the harshness, she could not allow herself to dwell on fear alone. She had to remain alert for predators or hidden dangers in the wilderness. She could feel her body weakening with each passing hour, the empty ache of hunger gnawed at her stomach, and the dryness of her mouth made it difficult to speak or even think clearly. Yet through the fatigue and fear there was a flicker of determination, a spark that refused to be extinguished. She remembered the times in her life when she had overcome challenges and survived against the odds, and she clung to those memories, drawing strength from them, knowing that giving up was not an option, that every breath she drew was precious, and every step she took brought her closer to the faint hope of survival. She thought of the life she still wanted to live, of the people she had loved and lost, and of the dreams that had driven her into this wilderness in the first place. Each thought became a lifeline, a reason to keep moving, and a shield against the despair that threatened to overwhelm her. The hours passed in a blur of heat and exhaustion. She stumbled and fell more than once, scraping her hands and knees on the rough ground, but she forced herself to rise each time, aware that sitting down for too long could mean never rising again. The sun began its slow descent toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the land and bringing with it the promise of cooler temperatures, yet also signaling the approach of night. And with night came new dangers, predators that moved silently through the brush, and the cold that would seep into her bones. She had to find shelter, and she had to do it soon. The woman pressed on with trembling legs, her eyes scanning the terrain for any sign of a safe place to rest, a hollow between rocks, a cave, or even a thick cluster of shrubs, anything that could offer protection. She moved with painstaking care, mindful of every footstep, aware that a misstep could lead to injury, or worse, the betrayal that had brought her here weighed heavily on her mind. The knowledge that she had been sent to die, that those who should have protected her had chosen otherwise, burned in her chest, yet she refused to let it crush her spirit. She would survive, not just to prove them wrong, but to honor the life within her and the resilience that had carried her this far. The wilderness stretched endlessly around her, a vast and merciless expanse that tested her body and spirit, and yet she continued forward, step by step, driven by a mixture of fear, determination, and the faint but unwavering hope that she might yet see safety. and that somehow in this harsh and unforgiving place she might find the strength to endure another hour, another day, and perhaps even a chance to live again. Hunger clawed at her stomach and thirst burned her throat as she struggled to keep moving through the harsh wilderness. Her body ached from exhaustion, and her muscles trembled with every step she pressed forward with shaky determination, clutching at the meager supplies she had managed to salvage from her betrayal. Each sip of water she rationed felt precious, yet barely enough to ease the parching dryness, and the small scraps of food offered fleeting relief that left her craving more. The sun beat relentlessly down upon her back, scorching her skin and sapping the little energy she had left. She stumbled over rocks and uneven ground, her feet blistered and raw, but she could not stop. The wind whipped at her hair and tore at the thin fabric of her clothing, carrying dust and grit that made it difficult to see and harder to breathe. Each movement demanded all the strength she could muster, and yet she refused to give in to despair, because to stop meant surrender, and surrender meant death. She pressed on, focusing on the rhythm of her steps, the rise and fall of her chest, the steady beat of her heart, as if clinging to these small certainties could shield her from the enormity of her situation. She imagined what it would be like if she fell alone in this wilderness, if the sun set and darkness enveloped her body, weary and unprotected her mind conjured visions of predators slinking through the brush and the eerie sounds of the night that seemed magnified in her exhaustion and fear. And still she walked step by step, her eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of help, any break in the harsh terrain where she could rest even briefly. She tried to ignore the sharp pangs of pain in her stomach and limbs, and the relentless pressure of fatigue weighing down on her shoulders, and she drew on memories of times she had endured hardships in the past, times when she had survived against the odds, clinging to those recollections as proof that she could endure this ordeal too. Each breath was a battle, each step a victory, and she reminded herself that the wilderness had not yet claimed her life, that as long as she moved, she had a chance. No matter how slim, she spotted a shallow depression between rocks that offered slight relief from the sun and stumbled toward it, her knees weak and hands scraping against the rough surface. She collapsed there, briefly pressing herself close to the ground, feeling the coolness of the shadow against her overheated skin. The twins she carried whined softly, and she cradled them desperately, trying to soothe them, while her own body screamed for rest. She whispered words of encouragement to them and to herself, willing them to survive, willing herself to survive. The hours stretched endlessly before her, and she focused on each small breath, each heartbeat, as if counting them could stave off the despair that threatened to overwhelm her. She clung to hope like a fragile lifeline, imagining that if she could endure just a little longer, somehow someone or something would appear to offer aid, or at the very least that she could find a way to carry herself and her precious children through the merciless expanse of the wilderness until safety or salvation could be found. The sound reached her before the sight, a soft crunch against stone and dry earth that made her breath catch and her body stiffen with fear. She lifted her head slowly, every sense sharpening as she searched the landscape, and then she saw him emerging from between the rocks, tall, silent, moving with a confidence that made her heart race. He was an Apache blood hunter, his presence unmistakable from his clothing, the way he carried himself, and the weapons at his side. Stories she had heard flooded her mind, tales of men like him, hunters, trackers, feared for their skill and ruthlessness, and terror surged through her veins. She pulled herself back, instinctively shielding her children with her body, even though she knew she had no strength left. To flee, the hunter stopped several paces away, his gaze steady and unreadable, and for a long moment they simply looked at one another. The wind passed between them, carrying dust and heat, and the pounding of her heart seemed loud in her ears. She waited for violence, for the end she had been sent here to meet, yet it did not come. Instead, he lowered himself slowly to one knee, showing his hands empty of threat, and spoke in a low, calm voice words she did not fully understand, but the tone carried something unexpected. Restraint, perhaps even concern. Her fear did not vanish, but it shifted ward with confusion as he reached into a small pouch and produced food, holding it out at a careful distance. Her stomach twisted painfully at the sight, and despite every warning she had ever been taught, she could not stop herself from staring at it. The hunter watched her closely, gauging her reaction, then set the food on the ground and stepped back further, giving her space. The gesture unsettled her more than any threat would have, because it contradicted everything she believed about men like him. She hesitated, torn between terror and need. Her children whimpered softly, and that sound pushed her forward inch by inch until she reached the nigh food. Her hands shook as she took it, expecting at any moment for him to strike, yet he remained still, his eyes alert but not cruel. She ate slowly, fighting tears as warmth spread through her body and strength returned in small, fragile waves. After a time he offered water, and then a blanket, worn but thick and warm. She wrapped it around herself, and the children, feeling relief wash over her so sudden it nearly broke her. The hunter spoke again, pointing toward the horizon, then to the sky, then to a nearby stand of rocks. His meaning slowly became clear. He was offering shelter, warmth, protection. Her mind struggled to accept it. Suspicion clung to her. Fear whispered that kindness in the wilderness often hid danger, yet her body understood what her mind resisted. She could not survive without help, and here it was standing before her in the form of the man she had been told would be her executioner. As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the land, she rose unsteadily and followed him at a careful distance, watching every movement, every shift of his shoulders, every turn of his head. He led her to a sheltered area where a small fire already waited, hidden from the wind, and the sight of it nearly made her collapse. He gestured for her to sit, then moved to stand guard, his posture vigilant, protective, and in that moment, as warmth returned to her numb fingers and her children slept peacefully against her chest, she realized that death had not come for her that day. Instead, she had crossed paths with a man whose mercy defied fear and whose protection had arrived when all hope had nearly faded. The hunter guided her through the rugged terrain with steady, deliberate movements, his eyes constantly scanning the horizon and his posture alert to every sound in the wilderness. She followed him closely, clutching her children to her chest, feeling the warmth of the blanket around them and the cautious safety in his presence. Every step was careful and measured. He showed her where to find small pools of water hidden in rocky depressions, and taught her how to dig shallow holes to gather moisture from the ground when the sun reached its zenith. He led them to shaded crevices between boulders where the heat was less suffocating, and motioned for her to rest. While he tended a small fire, the flames flickered gently in the wind, creating a circle of warmth and protection around them. He moved with precision, gathering dry brush for fuel and positioning rocks to shield the fire from gusts of wind. She watched him work with a growing sense of awe and gratitude, noticing the patience in his movements and the way he seemed to anticipate the needs Of both her and her children, without a word, he taught her how to arrange the twins so that they could stay warm and protected, even when she could not hold them constantly, and he showed her how to ration water and food carefully to make it last. Until they could reach a safer area as they traveled, he remained vigilant, guiding them through narrow passages and away from steep cliffs or hidden dangers. She stumbled often, and he supported her silently, offering a steadying hand and a reassuring glance. His presence became a lifeline, a constant source of stability in a world that had been cruel and merciless. He shared small lessons of survival, teaching her to read subtle signs in the land, the way shadows fell, the movements of birds, and the scent of the air to anticipate weather changes or the presence of predators. Each lesson strengthened her confidence and resilience, and she began to feel capable of facing the wilderness alongside him rather than being at its mercy. When night fell, he kept a watchful eye while she rested, her children sleeping against her chest, the fire casting warm light across the rocks and illuminating the trust slowly growing between them. She felt a sense of safety she had not known in days, realizing that the man she had feared as an enemy had become her protector and guide in this harsh, unforgiving place. With each passing day, they moved steadily toward more hospitable terrain. She regained strength, her children thrived, and she internalized the skills he had taught her, recognizing that survival required not just courage, but knowledge, patience, and attentiveness. Together, they navigated the desert landscape, building an unspoken bond of trust, respect, and reliance on one another. His guidance transformed the wilderness from a place of death into a landscape where she could endure, where hope could exist, and where the smallest comforts of warmth, food, and safety were enough to sustain life and spirit until they could finally reach land where she could begin again. When they finally emerged from the harsh wilderness and saw the edge of a small settlement, the woman felt a wave of relief and disbelief wash over her. Her body ached from the long journey, and her muscles trembled with fatigue, yet her heart soared with the knowledge that she and her children had survived the ordeal. The villagers noticed them approaching and rushed forward, offering food, water, and shelter, their expressions a mixture of concern, curiosity, and awe at the sight of her fragile twins and the tale of survival that seemed almost impossible to believe. She cradled her children close, feeling their tiny bodies warm and safe against her chest, and for the first time in days she allowed herself to breathe freely. The Apache blood hunter remained at a careful distance, his presence steady and unobtrusive, yet unmistakably protective. He spoke briefly to the villagers, explaining as best he could what had happened, and then stepped back into the shadows, his duty complete and his guidance ended. She watched him disappear among the rocks and felt a mixture of gratitude and awe, understanding that without his intervention, they would not have made it through the wilderness. She reflected on the fear and exhaustion of the past days, on the hunger, the thirst, the uncertainty, and the terror, and realized that those experiences had revealed a resilience within her she had never known, a determination to survive that burned brighter than any despair she had faced in the wild. The settlement became a sanctuary, a place where she could care for her children without constant fear and slowly rebuild her strength and confidence. She thought often of the hunter who had saved them, a man whose reputation inspired fear, yet whose actions had shown profound courage, compassion, and humanity. She carried his lessons in her mind every day, the skills he had taught her: how to recognize danger, to ration food and water, to find shelter, and Warmth and to trust carefully yet wisely in others became part of her survival instincts, and she knew that she would honor his guidance by living fully, by raising her children safely, and by remembering that even in the harshest places acts of kindness and protection could appear where least expected. As her children grew and the settlement became home, she told her story quietly, at first to those who would listen, and later more openly, and it became part of the community lore, inspiring others with its testament to resilience, trust, and the unexpected humanity of a feared man. She never forgot the blood hunter who had crossed the wilderness to save her and her children, and she carried his courage and kindness in her heart as a reminder that even when life seems bent on ending one's story, survival and hope can emerge from the most unlikely sources, and that gratitude and the will to live can transform despair into a future filled with possibility and light.